Mr. Chair and Ranking Member McCaskill, and add me to the group that would call for the application of common sense here when it comes to protecting people in large events. I wanted to focus with you, Mr. Mandia, on some of the issues that come up with small vendors and cyber threats. In your testimony, you spoke about the challenges that smaller companies and organizations face from cyber threats. In particular, you pointed out that their vulnerabilities not only threaten their operations, but their partners, their customers, their suppliers, and ultimately our country's economy. Your point underscores the importance of making sure that the federal government does all it can to help protect these small companies and service providers. Last spring, DHS revealed that Russia targeted several small vendors through a cyber attack to gain access to our electric grid. DHS reported that many of these vendors lacked the resources or dedicated cybersecurity professionals to detect and prevent these kinds of intrusions. It does not seem reasonable to me to expect companies with only a few staff and maybe one full-time IT professional to be able to defend against the fully offensive cyber capabilities of state-level cyber actors like Russia. What should be DHS's role in helping to secure these companies, and what sort of resources should we be considering in order to achieve some degree of defense against state-level hacking?
Got it. Yeah, got to take this in a couple parts. Great question, one of great concern to many people. First and foremost, if all we do is play defense, if we're up against Russia, we're up against Wayne Gretzky on a penalty shot. Yeah. And so, and we have a bunch of goalies out there where if they get unlimited penalty shots, they're going to put the puck in the net. What I've observed in the private sector in practice is the bigs are helping secure the smalls and taking on some of the burden of doing that. But we can't win if all we do is focus on defense, defense, defense. And that's why we need to impose risks and consequences to those who do it, which means we have to get attribution right, support the technical assets, human assets, the international cooperation so that we know who is doing these attacks, right, so we can at least weigh proportional response to it. But when we also look at it, we got to take it in bite sizes. We can't secure every company overnight, right, all the smalls. So you got to start with the ones in the critical infrastructures. Right. And I believe if you can secure the bigs first, the bigs will help you secure the smalls, and you start with the utilities, you start with healthcare, you start with communications, and you work that way. And I think you just got to take it industry by industry. If you protect a company, then you can protect the industry, and if you protect certain industries, you can protect the nation. So 3 ways to slice it, but we're certainly going to need some deterrence to come to the table.
Well, I thank you for that response, and we will likely follow up with you on it some more. I wanted to move now to the issue of federal network security. According to your testimony, FireEye has worked closely with DHS and dozens of civilian federal agencies to provide these agencies with the capabilities needed to achieve a baseline of security against cyber threats. As we see increasingly more sophisticated and diverse cyber attacks, DHS's role in helping to protect federal agencies and the .gov domain from cyber intrusion will become all the more important. To that end, DHS has endeavored to strengthen the tools and capabilities it provides to federal agencies to protect themselves, including the maturation of its 2 signature programs, the Einstein program and the Continuous Diagnostic and Mitigation program. Can you please talk to us about the value of these programs in enhancing federal network security and how they may need to evolve in order to keep pace with a really diverse and ever-changing cyber threat environment?
Yeah, I can, and I'll make it brief. I mean, you got to start somewhere, and I was a big proponent of the Einstein stack, because it sets the floor of how good you are and you know what you're working with. And if you can have a referenced architecture, it's easier to manage. We have a shortage of security professionals. You don't want to learn 180 different products. You need to keep it down to the 5 to 8 that are best of breed at that moment. But you also have to create a learning system, and that's where the intelligence comes in. At the highest level of abstraction, I've been working with the government since 1993 in cybersecurity. Yep. We are getting better every year, period. So that's the good news.
Yep. Well, thank you for that. And let me follow up with one last topic on the issue of cybersecurity generally, which is something you've talked about, cyber resiliency. You mentioned it in your testimony that one of the best ways to counter the threat of a crippling cyber attack is to mitigate the effects of such an attack through strengthening a private and public sector cyber resilience. You gave the example of how an Alaskan-based company worked to survive a ransomware attack by reverting to typewriters and handwritten notes to maintain daily operations. While I was governor, we worked to develop continuity of operations plans for our state agencies and government, and that included considering how to access data and how we'd operate without technology. Now, obviously, in an ideal world, we want to avoid bringing out carbon paper again, right? But can you help us identify the best ways to achieve effective cyber resiliency? What sort of mechanism and incentives would need to be put in place to encourage the private sector to develop this kind of resiliency, and what can the U.S. government's role be in helping to achieve baseline cyber resiliency?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And bottom line is live fire drills. The only way you're ever going to get better at something is you force the issue. And you keep it, maybe it's utilities and energy first, healthcare, telecommunications, financial services are pretty good on their own. But if you think about it, if the gloves came off in a modern warfare today, what are the two top targets? It's going to be energy. Yeah. It's going to be telecommunications. And that's where they're mostly in the hands of the private sector. So you have to do a joint drill. And they already are doing this. But the only way to get unvarnished truth, every CEO is operating on we're as secure as we can get. Yeah. Even they want the live fire drills, that red teaming exercise to see what can happen, what is the art of the possible. And then if you coordinate it, it would maybe be a 1-day or 2-day event every year where you had the private sector, public sector do a joint drill. That simple. And that'll give us both, A, how good are we? You get unvarnished truth. And B, so what do we do about it and how do we operate through it? We'll learn a lot just by practicing.
Well, I thank you for that answer, and I think it also speaks to the need not only to prioritize it in concept, but prioritize it in terms of resources, because in my experience, if you don't assign that kind of coordination and practice as a priority and devote resources to it, it always gets pushed aside with the urgency of everyday operations, and so we need to really focus on it. I thank you for your expertise and your help.
Senator